Hey guys, how's it going? Articulation here, and today I'm finally revealing my custom 3D printed action figure. This is an action figure that I've made completely from scratch, and no parts are reused, anything like that. All of this is sculpted by me and printed by me. So yeah, I think I'm really excited to bring this to everybody, and yeah, let's have a better look at this action figure. So before we look at the action figure, I just wanted to let you know this is going to be a long video, so I'm going to go through like a little bit of a history on how I got into making 3D prints and actually sculpting 3D like parts as well. So it might be a little bit longer, but it's a fully articulated action figure which is 3D printed, which you can make at home if you want. I've checked the materials, I've tested so many different materials, I've tested so many different prints, and this is the best result that I've achieved with certain tools that I've used, which I'll go through now. But basically, I wanted to create my own action figure. It just happened for some bizarre reason. I got into 3D sculpting, I got into 3D printing, I bought myself a 3D printer. I used to buy 3D sculpts from other artists online, and basically I started printing them out. I started learning a tool that I use every day now, Blender 3D. So it's a 3D sculpting, 3D modeling kind of tool. You can animate on it as well, but I use it primarily for modeling and sculpting. And Blender is a free tool which has been really helpful, pivotal in my journey as a 3D creator and also an action figure customizer. I use the Elegoo Mars 2 Pro printer, which is the 3D printer I use. I got it on Amazon. I don't remember for how much. They've got an Elegoo Mars 3 now, which is more improved, higher resolutions, basically better dimensions. But I use the Elegoo Mars 2 Pro printer, and it is perfect. I've never had any issues with it. I've had to do a whole bunch of learning throughout the process, but I think the printer was like a big part of my success as well, because it's been so helpful. I don't think it's ever like given up on me. Like it does everything that it needs to do perfectly well. So I'm really happy with the printer, and if I had to, I'd probably buy the Elegoo Saturn, bigger build plate, but I think similar technology. So that's the printer. I use the Resin M58 resin for this print, and the reason I use it, I'll go into more detail on it later, is because the resin does not, when you're articulating it or when two resin printed parts are touching, they do not powder like a sanding effect. So basically, when you're sanding something, you have like the material turns into powder. If you're rubbing two pieces of resin together, they usually create a powder residue. With Resin M58 resin, it does not. So that is why I've used the Resin M58 resin. I'm not sure if I'm saying Resin right. Hopefully I am, but it is what it is. That is how I say it. I am also using the Tech Tenacious resin, which is like a more flexible kind of resin. I'm using it to give my Resin M58 resin a little bit more flex, so that if I heat it up, it basically it's easier to plug things in. And for an articulated figure, you have to be able to plug things in. So for an example, the elbow joint is plugged into the bicep and the forearms. So that is only possible because I'm using Tenacious, which gives it just a little bit more flex. And also, even if your action figure falls, or even if your 3D print falls from like a height, it survives it because of the Tenacious. It just resists that impact a little bit more. So it's really great. And yeah, both resins have been so good. I've actually worked with Resin to be able to provide you with a 5% discount code. So the discount code is AZRACH. You'll be able to find it in the description section below, and I'll also linked out the page where you can buy the Resin resin. So hopefully guys, if you're inspired by this, if you think the resin works well, because I've tried out so many resins and this is the best resin in my opinion that I found for functional 3D prints like action figures. So if that's something you want to do, if action figures is something you want to create, you might want to check out that resin. Yeah, and like I said, use AZRAC as a code. I don't get any kickbacks from this. I'm just too small to be able to share a sale, things like that. I'm still too small as a channel, so I'm not getting any proceeds from this. It's just purely because Resin wanted to do something for you guys out there. They're providing you a 5% discount code. And yeah, if you want to buy this resin, just get it off of Resion and use the code ASRAC. So the whole reason I got a 3D printer was because I was looking at these amazing customizers, Tony May, other guys. Basically, they were using 3D printed stuff. I think Figure Gear was part of that inspiration as well. They were selling printed stuff from their website. They were basically creating all these awesome 3D gear like holsters, belts, pouches, tactical vests, all that stuff. That really inspired me. So that's why I went ahead and brought a 3D printer. And yeah, it actually started off as like a head sculpt kind of project. I wanted to create my own head sculpts, basically give the figures like my own twist. I'll show you a couple of sample head sculpts that I've done just in a bit, but yeah, that's how I started things off. And then once I was doing head sculpts, I got comfortable with it. I wasn't that good at the beginning, but then I think 3 to 6 months, I started getting better. It was just, I was getting to places where I was happier with the sculpts. So I started printing them out. I haven't sold any yet, but I'm hoping to start selling on Cults 3D. So if you want any of my head sculpts, I've posted a couple there. If you want any of my head sculpts, you can purchase it off of there. So yeah, feel free to look at that as well. But basically, after I did head sculpts, I thought, hey, why don't I do armor stuff as well, like tactical vests, tactical suits, whatever it is. So I was like, what project should I do? And because I was customizing a whole lot of Mezco type projects, like the Dark Knight Returns Batman, I was obsessing over it because I didn't have it, and I couldn't find it at a good enough price. So I was basically obsessing over it, and I was using Marvel Legend figures to create the Dark Knight Returns Batman. And basically that got me thinking, how about I do an armored Dark Knight Returns Batman in the Mezco style? And I've got a sample, I'll show you in a bit. But yeah, that's where that inspiration came from. And then when I was working with that figure, like basically that Marvel Legends body that I was using to create the armored DKR Batman, it got really tough to size things up because I did not have the actual Marvel Legends scan, because I was working off of basically reference images. I was sizing things too big, I was sizing things too small. So what I ended up doing was taking a bunch of photos of my figure and manually just trying to sculpt it exactly 1-to-1 into my computer, and that's how I was scaling my figure parts. And I think I got to a stage where I really liked the body that I sculpted, and that's where I thought, all right, if I can sculpt a body, I could possibly sculpt an action figure. And here we are. Like it turned out to be true, and Mafex was a big inspiration for this action figure. If you look at the stylings, the different joints that I've used, or the different parts, they're very similar to how Mafex would do it. I'm not doing it exactly like Mafex, but Mafex is a big influence and a big inspiration for this action figure. So what you're looking at here is where my 3D printing journey began. I basically bought this Battinson 3D head sculpt from Cults 3D from a sculptor much better than me. I'll put links to the head sculpt in the links below, in the description below. But basically I bought this head sculpt before I bought a 3D printer because I wanted to see the differences between a resin 3D printer and a FDM 3D printer, and the differences are major. Like if you can see in front of you right now, the one on the left is a resin printed 3D figure or a head sculpt. The one on the right is a FDM printed 3D head sculpt. And looking at them close up, the layer lines on the FDM print is really visible. You do get like a lot of details on the head sculpt, but it's just not the same. I think the person that did this print for me, it was someone on Facebook that was advertising their 3D printing services. I basically paid them $10 and they gave me like 2 heads, which is pretty cool. Thank you for hooking me up with the heads, Facebook guy. But yeah, and then when I looked at that, I wasn't happy. I knew that this, if I painted this, if I put it on an action figure, I wouldn't be happy. And I actually had ordered like a Ender 3 Pro or Ender 3 FDM resin printer as well from Amazon. It arrived and I just couldn't bring myself to open it, so I sent that back and got myself a resin 3D printer. And this is the first 3D print I've done with that 3D printer. And look at the difference, look at the details, look at it's Battinson. Like it's a much better head sculpt than this one is, and that's what sold me on resin 3D printers, and that's how I got my Elegoo Mars 2 Pro 3D printer. So once I got better at printing in 3D, basically buying other people's sculpts and printing it out on my printer, I started actually sculpting my own 3D action figure heads. So this was the first sculpt that I've ever done, and it was basically just a simple sculpt, animated series Batman. I know he's not perfect, but I think from this angle, he looks like the animated series Batman, but it's because I created him. Obviously, I like him because I don't know, it's just something that I've done, and I'm super proud of it. So yeah, that's the first 3D action figure head that I've created, and the print files are actually on Cults 3D. If you want to buy it, you'll be supporting the channel as well if you're interested in this particular head sculpt. It should fit Mezco, but it's scalable. 3D prints always are, so you should be able to scale it the way you want it. So yeah, it could fit anything you want basically. So this is the first head sculpt I've done, and yeah, it took a lot of references from the animated series Batman, and I think it's cool. But yeah, I mean, it's up to you to decide. Like, if you find it cool, please do support me and buy this 3D sculpt. If not, I mean, it is what it is, right? But yeah, that's the first 3D sculpt I've done. So after the animated series Batman, I basically got a little bit more comfortable with 3D sculpting, and these sculpts I created as practice. This one here is the Dark Knight Returns. This one here is the Dark Knight Returns Superman. So I'll try to give him like a burly, kind of bigger, bulky feeling Superman look. I mean, this is when I was overexposing my 3D printers to the curing station, and this is why it looks a little bit crusty. But yeah, basically, this is my first 3D sculpt with like ears and more like human-like details. So that's why it's not the best, but I guess I wanted to try this, and I don't know, I like it still, probably because it's my own creation. So I'll put a link to the 3D file on Cults 3D as well if you guys are interested. And then I did this as an Action Figure 1000 Batman. So basically the Action Figure 1000 head sculpt we got, the Detective Comics 1000 head sculpt we got from Todd McFarlane was absolutely horrible, so I wanted to make my own, and this is the Batman I did back then, and this was when I had limited knowledge. So this is when I was, I think, maybe 2 months, 3 months in, and it's not the best head sculpt, but it still ticks a lot of boxes for me. And this is the default Batman I use for like the action figure, the Detective Comics 1000 figure from McFarlane Toys. So this is the head sculpt I've replaced the head with. So once I started 3D printing and sculpting myself, basically I went crazy and basically started to do all kinds of 3D prints. And there are a lot of heads there. There are a lot of bot heads, guns, accessories, etc., etc. And I also started working on boots, like for the V-Toys body. So that's where I started to realize, right, maybe this could become more. This could become not just heads. This could become action figure parts. And that's when I started doing parts. So during the phase where I was absolutely obsessed with action figure printing and basically doing stuff for my action figures, customizing, making new things, I was really intrigued by the Dark Knight Returns armored Batman action figure that Mifex was working on. Also, we didn't have a Mezco version of it, so we don't have Superman either, but I'd already created Superman at that point in time. So I thought that the next logical step for me in terms of doing something more, doing something new, advancing my skills, I thought that this was the next logical thing. And I started working on the armored Batman, which is similar to Mezco style. So basically all of these armored parts are 3D printed. So that's 3D printed here. The chest piece, it's something that only slips up on the front. The back is open so that you can basically take it off easily, and that's what it looks like. It's basically just a chunk of 3D printed resin, and it just fits on top of a Marvel Legends body. From the front, when you have cape on, you basically can't even tell that it's not going all the way back. It gives you the illusion that it is. It works for me, so that's why I've got it at that. There's a lot of battle damages that I started adding in, textures as well. Gauntlets, they were pretty interesting, really hard to do. I'm still bad at painting, so you can see that clearly there. The thigh parts are not painted yet. I don't know why I got lazy, probably. And the boots, very very tedious to sculpt, very tedious to actually get all the grooves in the right places, but I got it done and I was really excited about this project. The belt as well, I'm really disappointed by the paint, but well, I tried my best, and yellow is one of the harder paints to paint with, so that's why it looks that bad. I also started to use flexible resin, so this is the Resin F69 resin, great number, but yeah, it's the Resin F69 resin, which works really well in terms of flexibility. You can't break it. If you try, you can actually rip it apart, but it's much more flexible, much more sturdier. Like you can't. It's really awesome for parts like belts, and also the shoulder pads are also made with the same kind of stuff. So that's another resin that I tried out, which is really good. I actually wanted to use it in this custom as well, but I wasn't able to get the complex belt to print, so that's why I used just the Resin M58. But yeah, this was one of the projects that I was really excited with. I still haven't finished it because I got into like this new project of creating an actual action figure, and that was interesting, more interesting for me at that point in time. So I just went ahead and did that. But this is very close to completion, I think. So if I give it maybe like a couple weeks, I should be able to knock this out. And I work a full-time job, so I'm not able to give action figures too much time during the weekdays. So that's why I try to do most things either after work or on the weekend. So that's why it just takes a little bit longer for me to do everything. But yeah, I this is a piece that I really want to complete. I think it looks really cool so far, and I'll put the head up in Cults 3D if you want to print it as well. But yeah, the armor is not quite done yet, and I'm using too much resin. It's too thick, so you'll be wasting resin if you print this yourself. So I want to move away from that, start using like thinner parts. So it's something that I still need to work on. I haven't yet, but yeah, that was the next thing that I worked on, and that's when I started getting into maybe I can design my own action figures. So here it is, guys, like the full stack of failed 3D printed parts that I've made just to test things out. Different parts, different resins, different prints, different scales, just a lot of different trials and error. But I'll basically show you everything that I printed in sequence, and we'll go through how I ended up with the Batman that I have now. So here we have the first 3D printed body that I tried to print. It's basically got all these allowances for joints, stuff like that, but it was not a functional print. Basically this is way too square. My later prints obviously got more rounded so that you get more articulation and movement, and this is like I think the third version. There's like more updates that I've done with that as well. But yeah, basically that's what my first 3D print looked like. It didn't allow for too much articulation. This is a brittle kind of material, so it doesn't have any flex whatsoever. So when you to allow it to actually go into the peg, the allowance here, or the hole here, it basically I had to make the hole a lot bigger than the actual peg, and that's why it just basically slips in and out. It did like prove the concept that I could actually make it. There's a lot of material down here as well, which basically conflicts with this bit, so it doesn't allow for that much movement, and the body in general is really flat. It's not as 3D or as realistic as I want it to be. But yeah, that's my first 3D body print. After that, I made some adjustments. Basically started making things a little bit more round. As you can see here, the peg basically just broke off. The hand peg actually fits in, but I had to do a lot of sanding to make that work. But yeah, that proved the concept of this working as well. So I had the peg joint here, which is previously, yeah, it's basically that joint, that ball joint thing here, and then this peg basically you added in later. I actually forced this to work, and there's a lot of powdering here. That's what I was talking about. That's the powdering here. So this was an overly complicated like joint. If you look at that, it's got so many complex parts. I didn't have to be that complex. I figured out later on. And basically it's kind of trying to be like the Mayflex figure where it's popping onto this, and because it's not flexible, I basically just made the hole a little bit bigger than the peg, which allows it to be basically insert like that. But there is, apart from friction, there is no hold. so that didn't really it works for Mafex, but for a 3D printed action figure that was a bad concept. So if you look at that, it's a floating piece, so the bicep is just a floating piece, and then the shoulder basically sits on top of that, and it's really hard to align because it's brittle resin. I'm worried about breaking it, plus it's not flexible at all. Like if you have an action figure that you want to take apart, you'd probably heat it up. This you couldn't do heating up with. So basically, yeah, it allows for articulation, but it's not the best, and it just keeps the more you move it, the looser it gets, because the resin just keeps powdering away. Just like you chip away a little bit of resin every time you move it, and then it basically just turns into powder. But yeah, that proved the concept that it could work again for me, and it just allowed for some articulation to happen even with a 3D printed figure. So I was really happy with that. Obviously things kept breaking, but it got to a point where I was a little bit happier, I was a little bit more excited, and yeah, I just started sculpting more. And after that part, I basically looked at adding these things, tabs, to basically hold on to the action figure. So the whole point, so if you look at this here, it broke off and then basically stuck here, the peg. But the whole point of this was to create some additional material that would flex. That's why I've left a little bit of hole or gaps on either end, so that it'll flex a little bit, allow the peg to go in, but it'll keep it in rather than letting it out. So it does do that, but yeah, this unfortunately couldn't keep up, so it broke. But yeah, the designs started getting better. There was more movement allowances. I tried to do that with the shoulders as well, so the shoulder has that allowance as well, or the cavity. And yeah, I think things were looking a little bit better, but it was just a really needlessly complex print. So that's the trunks for that print. Before we get the trunks on, that's the peg. See, that's allowance, but it's way too loose. Because this is not flexible, I had to make the hole bigger than the peg, and that's why it's basically moves around a lot. So it was just a really complex print, and the legs wouldn't even stay in. I had to put foam just to make it like actually work, and you have to squeeze in the leg just the right way to actually make it sit on the figure, which is weird in itself, but you know. And with the legs as well, it was a really complex print. Like, it's just needlessly too complex. We've got 4 parts, individually moving parts that have basically attached, and that's the powdering. That's, if you don't allow enough like gaps, it will just basically grind on itself. So that's what would happen. It's just basically like a straight peg, which will not hold the figure in place because it's a straight peg. And if you keep using it, or if you keep moving it, it will break. Yeah, I used foam to tighten up spots that weren't too loose, blah blah blah, etc etc. It wasn't the best, but I still was getting more and more excited because I was actually proving that joints could work. They could fold around, they could flex, they could actually be action figures. So after all the trials and errors and using different resins, I finally found Ceratec on Amazon. Luckily they were selling on Amazon AU as well, and I got everything delivered for free. But yeah, I got the Ceratec Navy Gray, which is Ceratec Fast. It's basically the ABS like resin that Ceratec provide, and also the Tenacious resin, which basically adds a little bit of flex to the Ceratec resin. So that's what you're seeing here. And as a proof of concept, it worked really well, but it's flimsy as anything basically. And he's got Crocs on, obviously, so didn't look the best. And that's where I ran into the issue of powdering. So everything moves, like everything moves just as it's supposed to, but you can hear the streaking there. There's a lot of powdering here, there's a lot of powdering everywhere, but everything fit in place, and I was able to move this thing around, not have any issues. That's the powdering that I'm talking about. Pose them around, do everything. It wasn't the best in terms of joints, but I was getting there. It was getting better. So that's the first version of an action figure that I printed. and I was so happy with how he turned out, but I was just not happy with all the powdering. So this is like the shoulder joint. I basically just printed the ball just to try, so it doesn't have the allowances for articulation, but basically I printed this and this out to see what it will look like when you articulate things, and that's the powdering that happens. So that powder is probably not good for your health either, because it's tiny resin dust. It might be like not good for you. It's toxic, possibly toxic for your body. So yeah, that's why I was like, I'm not gonna use resin that would powder, because at the end of the day, it just doesn't look nice. It's like there's always resin powder every time you move the action figure, and every time you move the action figure, it gets a little bit looser. I didn't think that was the best way to go. But during this project, and I'll show you the arm as well. So that's the powdering going on here. And during this project, there were two key things I learned. Like one of them is that I could use simpler joints. So basically, I was using this elbow joint system, which hooks into. So you basically heat up the hand, the forearm, and then you just slide it in, rather than having the complex system of points going here and there. Like, yeah, this was so much simpler. It just made more sense, and it's easier to 3D print, and it functions just as well. So there's no loss of articulation. The articulation point here runs into each other, and that's more of a design flaw, nothing to do with the resin or the print. But yeah, it's just a design flaw. But yeah, that's how I figured out like there's easier ways to do things. And I was making things a little bit too complex. Like, this is the thigh joint, or the joint that is sitting inside here. So in I guess it works well in theory, but as soon as you heat it up, it gets really squishy. So there's no, you don't have any, anywhere to squish into the thigh joint, because this is like solid resin. It just doesn't allow, so everything else squishes when you're pressing it, and it doesn't go into the thigh joint. So the way I got this into the thigh joint is sanding out a whole chunk of resin from the bottom there, and I left the inside bit movable. Like, so if you want to move this bit, it does move within the leg, but it was needless. Like, it was just way too much engineering that didn't even give me any benefits, and I had to move away from that as well. So oh yeah, this is something else that really helped me see like a better way of doing things. So instead of having like a peg joint system like the wrist pegs that we have on our Mafex, I thought it would just be easier for me to do a ball that goes into a socket, and then you have all the articulation you could need, and without all the hassle. So yeah, something simple, works for 3D prints, and yeah, there's so much powder coming out of that. I don't think it's healthy, but yeah, that's how how that resin Ceratec really helped me get to the next level. And I'm really thankful for like all the videos online on Ceratec, Ceratec Tenacious guys that like a lot of guys that make videos on the Ceratec Tenacious resin. There's a lot to learn, and after so much research, months of research, I finally found Resion, and on their website they had a functional 3D print. I think they were printing a Transformer, Optimus Prime, I don't know what it is. That's when I figured out that that's what I wanted to do, and I ordered Resion M58, and this is the result. So now we're here, multiple trials and errors, lots of learning, and it's something that I'm really happy with. I think it's at a stage where I still need to work on a few things, like maybe making the joints a little bit more sturdier, different things like that. Adding a little bit more detail, like you've got the details on the thighs now, and then basically other parts, but I can still make it better. I still think I need to work on the proportions a little bit. If you followed me on Instagram, you would have seen that this was the thigh joint that I was using. This was the thighs that I was using previously. So it obviously had less details, but it was too short. So yeah, I lengthened it a little bit so that it would scale better with Mafex. So yeah, things like that I still need to work on a few tweaks. Just in terms of engineering, if you look inside here, it basically just has a cavity for that little bulb thing to go into. It's not over engineered, it's just a simple joint. It's just hollow cavity that allows the joint to go in. And this here, it allows for you to, so I've used a little bit of key joint fix here so that it holds on to the figure a little bit better, gives a little bit of resistance, and basically just a little bit more posable, which really helps. I think resin 3D printing isn't, or maybe it's my design, it's not at that stage where it performs just like a action figure where you can basically move things around and it'll stick at certain angles. So key joint fix definitely helped a lot to make the joints a little bit more, I guess, to add a little bit of resistance. But yeah, there's a whole lot of sculpting details that I've put into the figure. This joint basically, rather than turning like the inside joint turning as well, I made it a single piece with the inside joint basically being part of the entire sculpt. So what that allows you to do is basically it sits on the peg like this, and it allows you to rotate just like a Mafex figure would without having any complexities. So it's just sculpted in, if that makes sense. With the boots, I did something unique as well. Not unique, but basically what I've done is the boots are similar to Mafex, just a single piece. But yeah, it's a joint that's sitting within, and like I was talking to you about the thighs or the resin rub. So if I do that and I'm pushing really hard, absolutely no rub at all. So there's no like resin flakes coming off. There's a little bit of scratches there, but that's because I was pushing too hard. But there's no resin flakes coming out that could be injurious to your health or whatever, right? So that's a lot better. And a Resin M58, that's the resin to go with if you want to build action figures. I also did try to use the Resin F69 for the more functional, like the belt print, so that it's a little bit more flexible, but the print failed midway through. The belt printed alright, but then there's like a bunch of deformities here and there, like there's tears, and this basically just printed like that. I don't know how that happened, but there are a bunch of deformities. The cowl piece I also tried to print, or I don't know what that's called, the cape piece I also tried to print with Resin F69, but yeah, it was too thin in some areas, so I changed the sculpt a little bit so it was evenly thin or evenly thick, which is a lot better. But I would like to print it with this kind of resin later on. It just is much more flexible. I didn't want to reprint the whole thing again, so that's why I just used that resin. Their trunks, a similar story. They're really flexible, but because they are too thin, like I made them too thin, it just wasn't sturdy enough, and it couldn't hold its own weight basically when printing because too thin, and it became like a little bit warped. So that's why I went with the M58 resin. But yeah, apart from that, let's get into the articulation a little bit. There are a few things I want to fix still on the figure, but the head can look up that much. With the neck, it can look up that much, which is a lot. You can look down pretty much all the way, bury the chin, side to side pivots, no issues there. And all of that without any resin flaking or rubs. The torso can do everything you'd want, so it can crunch up that much, crunch back, it can basically go all the way around, no issues there. The shoulders, they're a little tight, I don't move them that much, but basically they have like a small shoulder butterfly in there, basically moves all the way around. The neck piece or the cape piece, I want it to be stuck onto the figure. I never thought it through. I basically just printed it out, put it on the figure, it fits, it stays there, but as soon as you start moving it, it rattles, so which is not good. So I need to work out like a peg system that goes into the body, and it basically can hold the cape down as well. But the shoulders can also go up and down. The biceps can do the 360. double jointed elbows, but it's not the best range. I might need to work on that a little bit, but it's fully double jointed. The wrist peg is an actual peg system, so if you can see that, it can go up and down, it can allow you to rotate, and it's just like a peg system that Mezco or Mafex would use, but it's just my design, so it works really well. But you've seen that proven by other companies. So yeah, in terms of the body, this body is a lot more dimensional, like it's more three-dimensional. It's not flat like the other one. It's got more rounded corners. It just looks more human, I guess. The legs is something else that I need to work on. They can kick up that much, but you can force it to go a little bit higher. I think it's the trunks as well that doesn't allow it to kick it up that much, but basically it allows you to go up and down. Kiki joint fix definitely helps keep its pose. Knees can go double jointed, which is pretty much there. The thing is coming apart, so yeah, I'm redesigning that to be a little bit thicker. I think I broke that because it's too thin, but basically because it's flexible, it just fits right in. Okay, moving on. The leg or the feet actually have a double like a dumbbell kind of dumbbell, yeah. So it basically has a dumbbell setup now. So there's a ball that's going into the feet and a ball that's going into the calf area as well, so the lower leg. So basically it allows for double the articulation, so you could really tweak it out, tweak it in, go up, go down, everything like that. I didn't put the toe cut because I don't think that makes too much of a difference. And yeah, it's fully articulated. You can put him in poses, you can make him do stuff. If you have a sweet custom cape designing skills, you can make a custom cape out of it, make it really nice. But yeah, this figure can now do everything a typical action figure will be able to do. So now if you look at V1 and V2, like V2 and that one obviously V1, you can obviously tell that they might be cut from the same cloth, but they are completely different levels in terms of action figure. The one on the left I think looks a little bit more blocky, looks more, I don't know, it kind of looks like PS2 graphics, if that makes sense. And this one's maybe now PS3. I'm still not at the PS5 level. I don't think I'll get there anytime soon. Probably need years of practice, years of doing this, but I think I'm getting there. So this figure, there's still a few tweaks I want to do. Like I said before, this is just like a floppy kind of mess, so yeah, it's no good. But yeah, basically with this figure, still a few improvements I want to make. I want to make the joints have like a little bit of a bigger lip, so that they are stronger, they've got more cavity, and they don't break off as easy. I think that's starting to break off now, which I don't want. And I basically want like them to be a little bit more frictional, like there's a little bit more friction within the joints. So I'm still trying to figure that out. But in terms of posing, it can do anything you want it to do, which is pretty sweet. So this is Batman doing, I don't know, something random. I also want to peg this down, hopefully, so it doesn't get in the way in terms of articulation at the moment. Like you could do whatever you want with the hand and then it'll still allow you to do it. But if I print it with this kind of a rubbery material, I think it'll just sit a lot better, and it will also allow for some flex, so there's no issues with articulation. But yeah, basically this is a little bit stiff as well at the moment, but it's probably because I don't move it as much. But yeah, you can articulate it pretty well. Again, there's no powdering, which is the best thing about using the Resin M50A, which is the best resin I've used in terms of functional 3D printing. Yeah, so I still want to fix the collar so that it stays in place, or it pegs into the body. And basically if I have a cape underneath, it pegs into the cape and then keeps the cape in place as well. I've already worked on a longer holster. So this holster, it was designed with this thigh in mind. So this thigh being shorter and this thigh being longer. Obviously this thigh, the holster doesn't reach like that band around the thigh, so it just sits a little too high at the moment. So I've made a holster that's a little bit longer. I also want to add a system that allows the belt to stay pegged in to the body. So maybe something at the back here, it just allows it to stay pegged in. The holsters work fine. I think they're a little bit like rattly at the moment, so you can put the gun in. Whoa, that broke apart. You can basically put the gun in, no issues there. But yeah, I just want, maybe if it's a more flexible material like this one, it will have a little bit more friction as well, because there's a little bit of tackiness to this kind of rubber print. So that would possibly give it like a little bit more of a hold. And with the legs, if it's a rubbery underwear piece, you could possibly get more range, because this currently is running into a solid piece of plastic or resin, so that could probably make it better. But apart from that, I think it's pretty much done. I'm hoping to, once it's finalized, put it up on Cults 3D so that you guys can download it. Maybe Cults 3D, maybe CG Trader, whatever happens in the future. I'll basically put updates on Instagram. You guys can follow me there if you want, and also azrakcollection.com if you want any tutorials to any of my other custom projects that I've done. But once I've dialed everything in, hopefully I'll put this Batman figure. So it will be a Batman figure. It will be the Flashpoint Batman, and I'm hoping to work on other figures in the future. Some ideas I have at the moment is Tim Drake Robin from Hush. So that will complement the MeFX Hush line. I'm really excited about that. I might get working on that. Other ideas I have are Bane from Nightfall. MeFX doesn't usually do bigger figures, and I wanted to get a MeFX style bigger figure. So Bane would be a really good shout. And Bane from Nightfall is just really classic. We're getting the Nightfall Batman from MeFX. It will be a very complimentary figure to that. I'm also thinking about Killer Croc from Hush, but he is more animalistic in the Hush series. He's not like a human that has a skin disease. He looks more like just like an animal. So that might not be too interesting, because it doesn't have like the classical Killer Croc kind of traits. But Ra's al Ghul from Hush would be a really good figure as well. Like, people could actually use him as like a base body. It'll just be like good proportions, hopefully, and just like a functional 3D printable figure, and with a Ra's head, and you can basically use it for other things. If you're excited about that, maybe let me know. I'll put up on my Instagram, I'll put up like a few photos of possible next projects. So basically, based on whichever photos most liked, I'll try to work on that. But if I'm really inspired by something, maybe I'll work on that. I think I don't want to be stuck with any projects that I don't want to do at the moment, so that I basically see it all the way through. Flashpoint Batman, I did put up an Instagram story where I asked people to vote for Flashpoint or Nightfall Batman. Basically, those are the two options I had in terms of making the figure Flashpoint or Nightfall Batman. People voted for Flashpoint, and that's why I made Flashpoint. But moving forward, yeah, I'll just add some photos to my Instagram account. If you could like those photos based on which version of Batman you prefer, or which character you prefer, I should say. So based on the number of likes I get for any character, I'll try to start working on that. But basically, I want to be able to bring out at least 3 or 4 action figures each year. I don't think I want to overcome it and say 1 action figure a month, because I want to be able to, now with this Batman being complete, I worked on the wrist pegs being a little bit different, where you can easily swap it in and out. At the moment, I've got like a peg system in there which basically holds on to the hand or to the fist, but we don't want that, because this resin, if you're heating it, both these parts become soft. So when you're trying to pull it out, it basically might rip into that wrist peg. But because it's a 3D printable action figure, you can print out more parts easily, which then, you know, you're not worried about breaking any part. So if you break like the neck, just print out another neck. If you break Batman's back like Bean did on his knee, you could print out another back. You know, like it's a lot easier with 3D prints and actually having the file. You can print out like the same file 1,000 times and have like 1,000 of the same action figure or swappable parts, and you're good to go, right? So I'm thinking about making these files available on any of these 3D print file providing sites, and basically it will be like at a purchase, as a purchase, so you'll be able to print things out at home. Also, definitely do look at Resin M58. That resin has been like the sole reason that this project is at where it is at the moment, and as successful as it is at the moment. I wouldn't have been able to make this action figure if it wasn't for that resin, honestly. And yeah, basically I think maybe in a couple of weeks, when I get a little bit of time to work on it, I'll make this a little bit more sturdier. I'll start printing things out. I'll start putting things up on my Instagram so that you guys can have a look, give me suggestions, give me feedback. Looking forward to that. But eventually, I think maybe, hopefully in less than a month, you'll be able to download that file and print it yourself. So that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for joining me, guys. I hope you enjoyed this custom 3D action figure that I've done for you. I'll make it available as soon as I can, but follow me on Instagram to get updates. And if you want to buy Resin M58, check out Resin's link in my description. It's not affiliated, so I'm not getting any kickbacks. I'm not getting anything, but Resin were kind enough to set up a discount code ASRAC. I'm again not getting any kickbacks, but use that discount code and you can get 5% off. Thank you so much, Resin, for hooking us up.